everybody, welcome back to Storytime with Becky. Today we're going to be talking about the child Samuel. Samuel grows up to be a prophet, but he had a very important story even while he was still a little boy. So once upon a time, there was a woman named Hannah who was married to a man named Elkanah. And they wanted a child so badly. They were married for many years, but they were never able to have a child. So Hannah and Elkanah went to the temple and they sought counsel of a priest who worked in the temple, and they said, "Why won't God give us a child?" So the priest advised them to keep praying if they really wanted a child. So Hannah and Elkanah prayed every single day for a child. They wanted a child more than anything in the world. So God heard their prayers and blessed Hannah with a child. Hannah made a promise to God. She told God that, "Lord, if you bless me with a child, I will dedicate their life to you, Lord. They will only get to know you. I promise. I promise I will take them to the temple and they will live for you." So the Lord did just that, and he blessed Hannah with a child, a little boy, and she named him Samuel. So one day when Samuel was very young, I want to say maybe 10 to 12 years old, they took him to the temple to fulfill their promise to God. Hannah and Elkanah promised God that Samuel would live for him. So what better place to live for God than to stay in a temple and to praise him all day long? So they took Samuel to the temple to live with the people there, with all the priests. One night, Samuel was sleeping, and he heard someone call him. Samuel. In the middle of the night, he heard, "Samuel, Samuel." So Samuel gets up and he goes to the priest, thinking that the priest is the one that called him. He wakes up the priest, and the priest says, "I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." So Samuel goes back to his room and he tries to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, Samuel hears the same thing again. He hears a voice, "Samuel, Samuel." So he gets up and goes to the priest again, thinking that it has to be the priest. Someone is calling me. So he goes and he wakes up the priest. The priest says, "Samuel, I'm not calling you. Go back to sleep." So Samuel walks back to his room and he's obedient. And he goes back to sleep. And for the third time, he hears, "Samuel, Samuel." It gets louder. So he runs to the priest. And he said, "Sir, are you calling me? Are you calling me?" The priest says, "What is going on here? I'm not calling you." Then the priest says, "You know what? This isn't me. This isn't coming from me. This is coming from God. God is calling you, Samuel. Next time you hear someone call your name, answer and say, 'God, your servant hears you. I'm ready to listen.'" So Samuel goes back to his room and he does exactly what the priest says. He goes back to sleep, and for the last time he hears, "Samuel, Samuel." So Samuel sits up and he says, "God, your servant hears you. I'm ready to listen." Then God explained to Samuel that the people in Israel weren't being nice people anymore. They were God's people, but they weren't treating each other very nicely, and they were doing bad things. God wanted to use Samuel to change that. His story gets bigger much later as he gets older, and he becomes a very, very amazing prophet that God uses close to him. But there are some things that we can learn from Samuel when he was a child. The first one being that Samuel was obedient. When he thought that the priest was calling him, even in the middle of the night, he ran to him. He didn't want to sleep for a few extra minutes. He wasn't groggy and sluggish and dragged his feet to go see the priest. He ran to him 3 times. That's how we need to be when anyone calls us. We need to be obedient, and we need to rise to the occasion and be fast about it, to not take our time and be sluggish and lazy people. The second thing, God wanted to talk to Samuel even though he was a little boy. That means that God can use anybody. You don't have to be the wisest, oldest man in the city for God to use you. Samuel was only 12 years old, and God wanted to speak to him directly about this issue. He didn't speak to the priest. He didn't tell the priest, "I need your help." He told Samuel why. He told Samuel because Samuel was a child and he had a pure heart. He was innocent and he loved God very much and he wanted to help God's people. So that's why God chose him to help him with this mission. The third thing, even though Samuel was a little boy, he served God. He was diligent and he did everything that God asked him to. He didn't, beckon and say, God, I'm too small to be doing such a big mission. God, are you sure you don't want someone wiser than me? You sure you don't want someone that has more experience? You sure you don't want someone at least a little taller that people could take seriously? Samuel didn't complain. Samuel didn't argue. He listened to God, he heard what he had to say, and in his heart, he accepted this mission. And God was able to use his purity, he was able to use his innocence, he was able to use the love he had in his heart for him to help other people come closer to God. And this is the example that we need to live by as children of God, to always have that pure, innocent love in our hearts to help other people and to serve God, to bring people closer to him. Thank you for watching another episode of Storytime with Becky. I'll see you next time.